Get out of the car, now. You people are always where you don't belong. The words hit first, sharp and public, spoken with casual certainty by Officer James Donovan as he stood inches from the driver's door. 1 second later, his hand seized Special Agent Sophia Jenkins's arm and slammed her against the side of her own vehicle, metal biting into her wrists as the cuffs snapped shut, pain flaring, dignity stripped away in full view of the building she served. In that instant, as her cheek pressed against cold steel and her breath caught in her chest, the future of James Donovan's career quietly ended, even though he did not yet know it. Before going any further into this story, take a moment. Where are you watching from today? If you value stories about truth, accountability, and justice, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. That morning had begun without warning, without tension, without any sign of what was coming. Special Agent Sophia Jenkins drove her government-issued sedan through the familiar streets of Washington District of Columbia with the calm focus of someone who had earned her place through years of discipline and sacrifice. At 36, she was one of the FBI's most respected cybercrime specialists, trusted with investigations that touched national security. The case she had closed the night before involved foreign intrusion attempts against federal infrastructure. It was serious work, and she had done it well. That morning was supposed to be quiet, paperwork, briefings, normalcy. As she turned into the secure parking lot near the J. Edgar Hoover building, she allowed herself a rare exhale. Her assigned parking space was clearly marked. She had parked there countless times. As she shut off the engine and reached for her bag, she thought briefly of her father, pulled over again and again when she was a child in Baltimore. Always calm, always compliant, always explaining himself to men who never believed him. That memory had helped shape her path. She had chosen the FBI not for prestige, but for purpose. She stepped out of the car with her credentials already in hand, prepared to start another day of service. Officer James Donovan noticed her before she noticed him. He was 45, a veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department, assigned that morning to patrol the perimeter. His record included multiple complaints, most involving minorities, all resolved quietly. Raised in a family that taught him authority was never to be questioned, he carried his biases like unexamined facts. When he saw a black woman exiting a vehicle in a restricted federal area, his suspicion was instant and absolute. He approached fast, tapping hard on the window even though the door was already open. Jenkins turned calmly and greeted him. She identified herself clearly. She held up her FBI credentials. Official, current, unmistakable. She explained, evenly, that the space was assigned to her. Her voice was steady. Her posture was professional. She even offered to contact her supervisor or security to confirm her authorization. There was no anger in her response, no fear, only clarity. Donovan dismissed it with a smirk. He said the badge looked fake. He accused her of lying. He told her she was trespassing. As she repeated her identification, slower now, more deliberate. His tone sharpened. His hand drifted toward his holster. He told her to step away from the vehicle. Jenkins complied, understanding the danger of escalation. She moved carefully. She kept her hands visible. She spoke again. "I am a federal agent. You can verify this right now." He did not verify anything. Instead, he grabbed her arm. The force was sudden and unnecessary. Her shoulder twisted as she was turned and pinned. The cuffs cut into her wrists as they locked. Too tight. Applied with intent. The shock was not only physical, it was emotional. The humiliation burned deeper than the pain. Federal employees nearby froze, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether what they were seeing was real. Jenkins's voice did not break. She stated her name again. She stated her role again. Each word fell into a void of deliberate refusal. Donovan called for backup, over the radio. He reported detaining a suspect for impersonating federal personnel. The lie traveled easily from his mouth, smooth and confident. Jenkins stood restrained against her own car, the FBI building looming behind her, the symbol of her service now a silent witness to her degradation. Minutes later, Sergeant Robert Klein arrived, 52 years old, experienced, fully capable of ending the situation immediately. He did not. He glanced at Jenkins's credentials and then looked away. He accepted Donovan's version without question. He spoke of probable cause. He ignored protocol. He ignored reason. He ignored the simplest solution, which would have taken seconds. Officer Maria Lopez watched from a short distance, her stomach tightening as she saw Jenkins wince when the cuffs were checked and tightened again. Lopez recognized the badge. She recognized the wrong, quietly, carefully. She began recording. Jenkins was walked past her vehicle and toward a patrol car. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her wrists throbbed, her shoulders burned, her face remained composed. But inside, something old and painful had been reopened. She asked for verification again. She asked for the cuffs to be loosened. She asked for basic decency. None was given. At the station, she was processed like a criminal, fingerprinted, logged, placed in a holding cell. Hours passed. Her identity was confirmed only after the delay had served its purpose. When FBI Supervisor Alan Thompson finally arrived, his fury was immediate and unrestrained. Jenkins was released without charges, without apology, without acknowledgement of harm. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat quietly, wrists bruised, spirit shaken. The law had not protected her. Her badge had not protected her. Yet something else had begun to move. Witnesses existed, video existed, truth existed, and truth, once exposed, does not retreat. James Donovan went home believing he had enforced order. He had not. He had lit a fuse. By the time Sergeant Robert Klein arrived, the moment still could have been undone. One radio transmission, one glance at the credentials already visible against Sophia Jenkins's jacket, one decision to follow the law instead of protecting a narrative. Yet Klein chose otherwise. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, surveyed the scene with detached eyes, and listened to Officer James Donovan's version as if it were already fact. Jenkins stood with her hands cuffed behind her back, chest pressed to the metal of the patrol car, wrists numb and shoulders screaming under the strain. Her breathing was controlled. Her posture remained upright. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and unmistakably authoritative. "Sergeant, I am a federal agent. You can verify my identity in seconds." Klein did not acknowledge her directly. He circled her once, glanced at the badge she still managed to hold between her fingers, and dismissed it with a shrug. He spoke to Donovan instead, using phrases that sounded procedural but meant nothing. He said the situation was suspicious. He said the officer had probable cause. He said they would sort it out at the station, in that moment. Klein made a conscious choice to ignore protocol. He chose loyalty over legality. He chose silence over truth. Officer Maria Lopez watched from across the lot, her heart pounding. She had been on the force long enough to recognize when something was wrong. This was not confusion. This was not caution. This was power being exercised without restraint. She could see the red marks forming on Jenkins's wrists. She could see the way Jenkins shifted slightly, trying to relieve the pressure without appearing resistant. Lopez felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. If she did nothing, this would vanish. If she spoke, her career might vanish instead, slowly, discreetly. She raised her phone and began recording. The decision felt heavy, but it also felt necessary. Jenkins asked again for the cuffs to be loosened. Her fingers were beginning to tingle. The pain was no longer sharp. It was deep and spreading. Donovan responded by tightening the restraints, his movements deliberate. He leaned close and told her to stop talking. The words were low, but the message was clear. Compliance would not save her. Silence would not save her. Nothing she did would change his course. They moved her toward the patrol car. Each step sent a jolt through her shoulders as Donovan pushed her into the back seat. Her head brushed the door frame. It was not an accident. The door slammed shut. The sound was final. The world outside the car narrowed to a dull blur. Jenkins stared straight ahead, focusing on her breathing, grounding herself in training. She reminded herself of facts, her name, her rank, her role. She reminded herself that this would end. She did not yet know how much damage would occur before it did. The ride to the station was silent. Donovan drove with rigid focus. Klein followed behind, over the radio. Routine chatter continued, indifferent to what was happening in the back seat. Jenkins shifted as much as the cuffs allowed, trying to relieve the pressure on her wrists. The pain pulsed in rhythm with the movement of the car. She had faced hostile interrogations before. She had faced threats from criminals and foreign actors. None of that compared to this quiet certainty of being powerless within the system she trusted. At the precinct, she was removed from the vehicle and escorted inside. The cuffs stayed on. She was processed without comment. Fingerprints were taken. Her belongings were removed and logged. Officers passed by, some curious, some uncomfortable, most silent. No one asked why a federal agent was in custody. No one asked whether protocol had been followed. Silence again became its own form of force. She was placed in a holding cell. The door closed with a metallic echo that lingered. The bench was cold. The air was heavy. Her shoulders ached constantly now. Her wrists burned. Time moved slowly, stretching each minute into something longer. Jenkins replayed the encounter in her mind, not searching for mistakes, but anchoring herself in reality. She had identified herself immediately. She had offered verification. She had complied with every instruction. The truth was steady. Even if the world around her was not, verification finally came, but only after delay. Only after Klein had ensured that the message was delivered, when FBI Supervisor Alan Thompson arrived. The atmosphere shifted instantly. His expression hardened when he saw Jenkins behind bars. His voice, when he spoke, was controlled but edged with restrained fury. He demanded her release. He demanded to know why verification had not occurred immediately. He demanded accountability. The officers around him avoided his gaze. Captain Harold Vance was informed shortly thereafter. From his office, far removed from the consequences. He assessed the situation quickly. He did not ask about Jenkins' injuries. He did not ask about the decision to delay verification. He asked how the incident could be contained. He ordered it categorized as a misidentification. He instructed that no statements be made beyond internal channels. His concern was not justice. It was damage control. It was his own future. Jenkins was released without ceremony. The cuffs were removed. The marks remained. She stepped outside with Thompson, the city moving around them as if nothing had happened. He apologized. He assured her the Bureau would stand behind her. She nodded. Grateful, but distant. Something inside her had shifted. The illusion of protection had fractured. That evening, she sat across from Dr. Lisa Patel, her closest confidant and psychologist. Patel listened without interruption as Jenkins described the grip on her arm, the tightening cuffs, the cell door closing. Jenkins spoke of her father, of childhood memories resurfacing without warning, of the moment when her authority had been erased despite everything she had earned. Patel named the experience for what it was. Trauma, violation, betrayal. Naming it did not erase it, but it gave it form. When Jenkins returned home, exhaustion settled over her like a weight. She stood in front of the mirror and examined the bruises darkening on her wrists. They were real, undeniable, proof that what happened could not be rewritten. She lay down, but sleep did not come easily. Her body was free, but her mind replayed the sounds, the pressure, the silence. By morning, shock had given way to resolve. She would not allow this to be buried. She would not accept a report built on falsehoods. She would file complaints. She would document every injury. She would demand answers. Not out of vengeance, but out of duty. Silence would protect the wrong people. Across the city, James Donovan completed his paperwork with confidence. He believed the system would absorb the incident as it always had. He believed his authority had been affirmed. He did not yet understand that the delay, the video, the witnesses, and the injuries had already set something irreversible in motion. What he thought was routine enforcement had become the beginning of his undoing. The morning after her release, Sophia Jenkins did not wake in anger. She woke in clarity. Shock had passed. What remained was focus. She understood institutions. She understood how truth survived inside them. It survived only when it was documented, preserved, and forced into the light before it could be buried. She dressed carefully, her movements precise, ignoring the dull ache still lingering in her wrists and shoulders. Then she began the work that would define everything that followed. She filed formal complaints with the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility and with the Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The statements were exact. No exaggeration, no emotion, just facts, times, names, commands given and ignored. The refusal to verify her credentials, the use of force without cause, the tightening of the cuffs, the prolonged detention, the deliberate delay in confirming her identity. She attached photographs of her injuries. She attached medical documentation. She signed her name at the bottom with steady resolve. FBI Supervisor Alan Thompson read the report twice before responding. He did not soften his reaction. He did not minimize what had occurred. He told Jenkins plainly that what happened to her was indefensible. He escalated the matter to senior bureau leadership within hours. His message was unambiguous. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a violation, and the bureau would not look away. Within Metropolitan Police Department, the complaint landed on the desk of Internal Affairs investigator Marcus Reed. Reed had built a reputation quietly. He did not seek attention. He sought patterns. As he opened Donovan's file, the pattern revealed itself almost immediately. Excessive force complaints, disproportionate targeting, familiar language used again and again to justify outcomes. Each case resolved without discipline. Each file closed with identical phrasing. Reed noticed something else as well. Interventions, notes added late, reviews shortened. Captain Harold Vance's name appeared more than once. Reed sat back and exhaled slowly. He had seen this before. He understood what it meant to investigate a case that reached upward instead of outward. Still, he accepted the assignment without hesitation. He contacted Jenkins directly, not through intermediaries, not through legal language. He spoke to her plainly. He told her he had reviewed the initial materials. He told her he recognized a pattern. He told her he would pursue the investigation fully, regardless of pressure. He did not promise protection. He promised truth. Officer Maria Lopez had barely slept. The video on her phone felt heavier with every passing hour. She replayed it again and again, watching the moment Donovan grabbed Jenkins's arm, listening to Jenkins's calm voice, hearing Klein's dismissal. Lopez had joined the force to protect people. What she witnessed had violated that belief. She contacted Jenkins anonymously at first, then agreed to meet her in person when they sat together. Lopez's hands trembled. She admitted her fear openly. She also admitted her refusal to stay silent. She handed Jenkins the footage. Jenkins thanked her without ceremony. No grand speeches, just acknowledgement. Lopez agreed to testify if it came to that, fully aware of what it might cost her. Across the city. Journalist Emily Carter received a quiet tip. A federal agent detained in a secure FBI parking lot. No charges, no explanation. Carter had covered law enforcement accountability for years. She understood the significance immediately. She confirmed Jenkins's identity through multiple sources. She requested comment from Metropolitan Police Department. The response was vague and delayed. That told her everything she needed to know. She began digging, public records, prior complaints, political connections. She did not rush the story. She built it carefully, knowing that once published, it could not be undone. Captain Harold Vance felt the pressure building before the article appeared. He heard whispers. He received calls. He recognized the risk instantly. This was not a routine complaint. This involved federal authority, public optics, and his own ambitions. He summoned Sergeant Robert Klein and spoke carefully, choosing words designed to signal expectation without leaving evidence. The department would present a unified narrative. The officers acted appropriately. Jenkins had been uncooperative. Any deviation from that story would be viewed as disloyalty. Klein understood the message. He passed it to Donovan without embellishment. The pressure reached Officer Lopez quickly. Her assignments changed without explanation. Supervisors stopped engaging her directly. Conversations ended when she entered rooms. She documented everything: dates, times, statements. Reed did the same. Quietly, methodically. He preserved internal emails, complaint histories, and review notes that showed interference from above. He knew that once attention intensified, records had a way of disappearing. Jenkins visited a physician for a full evaluation. The bruises on her wrists had darkened. There was documented nerve irritation in her shoulders consistent with prolonged restraint. The report was clinical and unemotional. It did not speculate. It confirmed. Jenkins added it to her growing file. She resumed therapy sessions with Dr. Lisa Patel. The physical pain was manageable. The emotional impact was more complex. Patel helped her name what had resurfaced. The memory of her father's stops, the sound of cuffs, the feeling of authority stripped away despite compliance. Jenkins did not seek comfort. She sought understanding. She wanted to confront the experience without letting it define her. Patel reminded her that restraint did not equal weakness. Endurance did not equal acceptance. Captain Vance contacted Alan Thompson directly soon after. The conversation was civil, professional, and carefully phrased. Vance suggested that the incident be handled internally to avoid unnecessary strain between agencies. Thompson listened without interruption. When he responded, his tone was steady. The Bureau would not suppress a violation of civil rights for the sake of appearances. The line was clear. The call ended without resolution. Emily Carter's reporting advanced quickly after that. She confirmed the existence of video footage. She confirmed the delayed verification. The narrative Metropolitan Police Department prepared began to fracture under scrutiny before it was ever released. Carter scheduled publication. She gave Metropolitan Police Department a final opportunity to respond. The response was defensive and incomplete. Inside Metropolitan Police Department, tension spread. Officers whispered. Supervisors reviewed files that had not been touched in years. Reed felt the pressure intensify, but he did not slow his pace. Lopez prepared herself for retaliation and refused to recant. Donovan became increasingly defensive, his confidence eroding as questions multiplied. Jenkins remained largely out of public view. She focused on preparation. She reviewed timelines. She organized evidence. She trusted process, knowing that resistance would grow louder before it collapsed. Silence. This time was strategic. It was not submission. What began as a single unlawful detention had become something larger. Files were open, cameras were rolling, patterns were emerging. The system that had once closed ranks was being forced to confront its own reflection. No verdict had been reached. No public reckoning had yet occurred. But the foundation had shifted. And once it shifted, there was no returning to what had been. The story did not break gently. It struck with force and spread faster than anyone inside the department expected. Emily Carter's article went live early that morning, written with restraint and precision, the kind of reporting that let facts speak louder than outrage. A federal agent, wrongfully detained, handcuffed in a secured FBI parking lot, verification delayed, video evidence pending release. By midday, national outlets had picked it up. By evening, the footage recorded by Officer Maria Lopez was everywhere. The video removed all ambiguity. Viewers watched a calm, credentialed black female FBI agent state her identity again and again. They watched an officer grab her arm. They watched a supervisor refuse to verify her credentials. They watched handcuffs tightened instead of loosened. The sound of metal locking carried through the clip, sharp and unmistakable. The footage did not editorialize. It did not accuse. It simply showed what happened. And that was enough. Public reaction was immediate and relentless. Civil rights organizations issued formal demands for accountability within hours. Former judges appeared on television, calling the conduct unconstitutional. Retired law enforcement officials broke ranks to say what many still inside could not. This was not a mistake. This was misconduct. By the following morning, protesters gathered outside Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. At first, the crowd was small. By afternoon, it filled the block. By nightfall, it spilled into surrounding streets. They did not chant aimlessly. They spoke names. They spoke dates. They held signs with screenshots from the video. They demanded suspensions. They demanded charges. They demanded reform. The tone was controlled but resolute. This was not spectacle. It was reckoning. Captain Harold Vance stepped before the cameras that afternoon. His posture was composed. His words were measured. He stated that the officers had acted in accordance with protocol in what he described as a suspicious situation. He promised a thorough internal review. He asked the public to reserve judgment. The statement was familiar, polished, empty, as he spoke. Protest chants echoed faintly behind the barricades, behind closed doors. Vance's demeanor shifted. He made phone calls to city officials. He reminded department leaders of political realities. He warned that careers could be damaged if the narrative fractured. He instructed legal counsel to prepare defenses. He told internal affairs to proceed carefully. He did not ask whether the actions were right. He asked how far the damage could spread. Officer Maria Lopez watched the press conference from her apartment. She recognized the language instantly. It was the same language used to close cases quietly, the same language that had protected officers with patterns of abuse. Fear settled in her chest again, but it no longer controlled her. The truth was already public. She forwarded additional footage to Marcus Reed. She documented the subtle changes in her treatment at work, the cold looks, the sudden schedule shifts, the conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Sophia Jenkins watched the coverage in silence. Hearing her own voice in the video unsettled her more than she expected. Calm, controlled, professional. She recognized herself. Yet the memory still carried weight, the humiliation, the pain, the moment her authority meant nothing. She turned the television off and sat quietly, grounding herself. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the public now. The following morning, her phone rang. Victoria Hale introduced herself without preamble. Hale's reputation was well known. She had spent her career confronting police misconduct cases others avoided. She spoke plainly. What happened to Jenkins was a clear violation of civil rights, excessive force, false arrest, racial discrimination, deliberate indifference by command staff. Hale did not promise an easy path. She promised an honest one. Jenkins accepted her representation without hesitation. The lawsuit was filed in federal court within days. It named Officer James Donovan, Sergeant Robert Klein, Captain Harold Vance, and the city itself. The complaint was exhaustive. It detailed the incident minute by minute. It cited video evidence, medical reports, witness statements, and internal records. It alleged not only individual wrongdoing, but a systemic pattern of protection and neglect. The damages sought reflected both the harm inflicted and the need to deter future abuse. The city issued a brief denial and pledged cooperation. Few found it convincing. As the legal action moved forward, protests intensified, marches filled downtown streets, community leaders spoke with urgency, clergy spoke of moral failure, legal scholars explained the implications in clear terms. Jenkins attended one rally quietly, standing at the edge of the crowd. When organizers asked her to speak, she stepped forward briefly. Her voice did not rise. She did not accuse. She spoke of duty, of law, of accountability. Her restraint carried more force than anger ever could. Captain Vance escalated his efforts. He questioned Marcus Reed's objectivity openly. He suggested reassignment. He instructed department attorneys to challenge the admissibility of evidence. Reed documented every interaction. He understood that retaliation was no longer subtle, it was active. Still. He continued. He compiled timelines. He preserved emails. He secured records before they could be altered. The pattern was undeniable. Inside Metropolitan Police Department. Morale fractured. Some officers defended Donovan aggressively. Others withdrew into silence. A few began reviewing their own histories with discomfort. Old complaints resurfaced. Comparisons were made. The department's public statements grew more cautious as scrutiny increased. The language softened. The confidence faded. Emily Carter published follow-up pieces in rapid succession. One outlined Donovan's history of excessive force complaints. Another traced how those complaints had been dismissed under Vance's oversight. A third examined campaign donations and political alliances that had influenced departmental decisions. Each article added weight. Each narrowed the space for denial. Vance's press strategy began to fail. Familiar phrases now sounded evasive. Jenkins continued therapy with Dr. Lisa Patel. The attention brought new challenges. Patel helped her maintain boundaries, reminding her that visibility did not require constant exposure. Jenkins focused on preparation, on evidence, on endurance. She understood that public support could be powerful, but it could also be fleeting. The case would be won in court, not on television. Weeks later, the city attempted a quiet settlement. The offer was substantial, but far below the damages sought. It included no admission of wrongdoing. It required confidentiality. Hale reviewed it once and declined. Jenkins agreed without hesitation. Silence had already been used against her. She would not participate in it again. Outside Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, the crowds remained. Chants grew louder. Accountability was no longer abstract. It was specific. Names were spoken. Actions were recounted. The pressure did not fade with time. It hardened. What began as one unlawful detention had become a national reckoning. Power was being examined. Authority was being challenged. And for the first time in a long while, the system that relied on quiet compliance faced sustained, informed resistance. The outcome was no longer a question of whether justice would be demanded. It was only a question of how much the truth would cost those who had tried to bury it. As the trial date drew closer, the work shifted from exposure to construction, from outrage to precision. Victoria Hale understood that public opinion, no matter how intense, did not win cases. Evidence did, structure did, discipline did. She and her team worked long hours, assembling the case piece by piece, not to overwhelm, but to clarify. What happened to Sophia Jenkins would be presented not as a moment of bad judgment, but as the inevitable result of a culture that rewarded silence and punished accountability. At the center of everything was the video recorded by Officer Maria Lopez. Hale treated it not as spectacle, but as foundation. She watched it repeatedly, pausing at critical seconds. Jenkins identifying herself, her credentials visible in frame, her voice calm, measured, unmistakably professional. Donovan's sudden grip, the shift in his posture, the tightening of the cuffs instead of their release. The refusal to verify. The video did not require commentary. Its power came from what it showed and what it did not. There was no resistance, no threat, no justification. When the department finally released body camera footage under legal pressure, it only strengthened the case. The footage aligned with Lopez's recording in every essential way. Donovan's language was dismissive and aggressive. His tone carried certainty without basis. Sergeant Robert Klein appeared, glanced at the credentials, and chose inaction. Verification was never attempted, not because it was unavailable, but because it was inconvenient. Hale noted the timestamps carefully. Seconds mattered. Silence mattered. Medical documentation followed. Jenkins's physician provided sworn statements detailing bruising patterns on her wrists and nerve irritation in her shoulders consistent with prolonged and overly tight restraint. The injuries were not catastrophic, and Hale was grateful for that. Catastrophe was not required to prove violation. Pain was enough. Unnecessary pain was enough. The medical reports were clinical, restrained, and devastating in their simplicity. Then came the internal records. Marcus Reed's files changed the shape of the case entirely. What had been personal became institutional. Complaints against James Donovan spanning more than a decade. Allegations of excessive force. Allegations of racial bias. Each one closed. Each one minimized. Each one accompanied by similar language and similar outcomes. Reed's documentation showed something more troubling than neglect. It showed intervention, notes added late, investigations truncated, reviews overridden. Captain Harold Vance's name appeared again and again, rarely prominent, always present. Hale organized these records with care. She understood the risk of overreach. This was not about attacking character. It was about demonstrating pattern. A pattern ignored long enough becomes policy. She would show the jury how Donovan's conduct was not an anomaly, but a continuation, how Klein's inaction was not hesitation, but habit, how Vance's oversight was not leadership, but protection. Witness statements from federal employees present that morning added another layer of credibility. These were not activists. They were analysts, administrators, agents, people trained to observe and document. They described Jenkins's demeanor as calm and cooperative. They described Donovan's approach as aggressive and unwarranted. They described confusion and discomfort as a federal agent was restrained without explanation. None described resistance. None described threat. Their statements aligned naturally, without rehearsal, without contradiction. Emily Carter's reporting continued to narrow the space for denial. Her follow-up articles laid out timelines and connections with surgical precision. She detailed Vance's political fundraising ties to organizations opposed to police oversight. She traced how those relationships coincided with policy decisions and disciplinary outcomes. The reporting did not accuse, it contextualized. The public began to understand not just what had happened, but how it fit into a larger system of incentives and silence inside the Metropolitan Police Department. The pressure became impossible to ignore. James Donovan's behavior began to change. He grew defensive in conversations. He complained openly about being targeted. He blamed the media. He blamed politics. He blamed Jenkins herself. He never once accepted responsibility. His statements became erratic, his tone hostile. Colleagues noticed. Supervisors documented incidents quietly. The man who once relied on certainty now reacted from fear. Sergeant Robert Klein experienced a different unraveling. The strain followed him home. His family felt the weight of scrutiny. Friends distanced themselves. His confidence eroded. He consulted counsel more frequently, in private moments. Doubt crept in. He replayed the morning in the parking lot. The moment he could have ended everything with a single call. That call had not been made. Now the consequences were unavoidable. Captain Harold Vance made one last attempt to control the outcome. Through city attorneys, he authorized a settlement offer larger than any before it. The number was substantial. The conditions were familiar. No admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality, closure. The offer was framed as pragmatic. Hale reviewed it once. She declined without negotiation. Jenkins did not hesitate. Money without accountability was silence by another name. She had already lived through silence. She would not accept it again. Throughout this period, Jenkins continued therapy sessions with Dr. Lisa Patel. The legal preparation was intense, the attention relentless. Patel helped her separate preparation from self-erasure. Jenkins spoke openly about the violation of being restrained, of being reduced to suspicion despite her service. Patel did not soften the experience. She helped Jenkins carry it without letting it define her. They discussed testimony, not as performance, but as truth spoken steadily under pressure. Officer Maria Lopez prepared for her own testimony with quiet resolve. She knew retaliation was no longer a possibility. It was already happening. Assignments changed. Opportunities vanished. Still, she did not recant. She reviewed the video repeatedly, anchoring herself in what she had seen and recorded. Integrity. She understood now. Was not a feeling. It was a decision repeated daily. Marcus Reed did the same. He prepared for scrutiny, for attempts to discredit him, for questions about motive. He documented everything. He preserved backups. He understood that once the trial began, pressure would intensify. He did not flinch. As the trial date neared, the city's public posture shifted again. Statements grew cautious. Language softened. Confidence faded. The legal team prepared less for victory and more for containment. They knew the evidence was overwhelming. The best outcome now was mitigation. Jenkins reviewed her statement carefully, not to alter it, but to ground herself. She would describe the grip on her arm, the tightening of the cuffs, the sound of the cell door closing. She would describe the humiliation without embellishment, the fear without exaggeration. Her authority would come not from emotion, but from clarity. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered once more. Signs were raised. Names were spoken. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. This was no spectacle. It was expectation. Inside. Hale arranged her files neatly and looked once more at Jenkins. She nodded. The case was ready. Not because it promised victory, but because it honored reality. The months of pressure, documentation, and resolve had given direction to something that could no longer be contained. The system that had once closed ranks would soon be forced to answer, not in private meetings or prepared statements, but under oath, in full view of the truth. The federal courtroom filled early on the first morning of trial. Long before the judge took the bench, reporters lined the walls, observers filled every seat. The air carried a quiet intensity. Not noise, not spectacle, but expectation. Sophia Jenkins entered calmly beside Victoria Hale, her posture straight, her expression composed. She did not scan the room. She did not seek reassurance. She took her seat and waited, across the aisle. James Donovan avoided her gaze. Sergeant Robert Klein sat rigid, his jaw tight. Captain Harold Vance arrived last, flanked by counsel, his confidence carefully rehearsed. Victoria Hale opened without theatrics. Her voice was steady, her words were precise. She told the jury this case was not about confusion or miscommunication. It was about choice. A choice to ignore credentials. A choice to apply force. A choice to delay verification. A choice. Repeated at multiple levels. to protect power instead of law. She told them they would see evidence, they would hear testimony, and by the end, they would understand that what happened to Sophia Jenkins was not accidental. It was preventable. It was deliberate. The first piece of evidence was the video. Hale did not speak while it played. The room fell silent as jurors watched Jenkins identify herself, credentials visible. They watched Donovan's grip tighten. They heard the calm in Jenkins' voice and the certainty in Donovan's. They watched Sergeant Klein refuse to verify. The sound of the cuffs echoed sharply in the courtroom. When the video ended, no one spoke. The silence said enough. Body camera footage followed. It confirmed what the video showed. No resistance. No threat. No attempt to de-escalate. Donovan's language was dismissive, his posture aggressive, Klein's presence passive but decisive. Verification was never attempted. The defense objected to interpretation. The judge overruled. The footage spoke for itself. Sophia Jenkins took the stand next. She walked slowly, deliberately, and was sworn in. When Hale asked her to state her name and role, Jenkins did so clearly. When asked to describe the morning in question, she did not embellish. She spoke in measured sentences. She described parking in her assigned space. She described identifying herself. She described offering verification. She described the grip on her arm, the tightening of the cuffs, the pain spreading through her shoulders. She described the humiliation of being restrained in front of colleagues. She described sitting in a holding cell, wrists burning, knowing her authority had been erased without cause. Hale asked how it felt. Jenkins paused. She chose her words carefully. She said it felt like being unseen, like being reduced to suspicion despite years of service, like realizing that compliance offered no protection. Her voice did not shake. The courtroom remained still. On cross-examination, the defense attempted to suggest Jenkins had been uncooperative. Hale objected. The judge sustained. When pressed again, Jenkins responded calmly. She said she followed every instruction. She said she never resisted. She said the video showed the truth. The defense moved on. Officer Maria Lopez testified next. Her voice was quiet but firm. She described what she saw. She described recognizing Jenkins' credentials. She described the unnecessary force. She described deciding to record because she believed what she was witnessing was wrong. When asked why she did not intervene physically, she answered honestly. She said the power imbalance made that impossible. Recording was the only way to preserve the truth. The jury listened closely. Marcus Reed followed. He presented internal files with methodical clarity, complaints against Donovan, patterns of dismissal, interventions by command staff. Reed explained how investigations were truncated, how language was reused, how oversight failed repeatedly. When Captain Vance's name appeared on documents, the courtroom shifted. Reed did not accuse. He explained process. The effect was stronger than accusation. FBI Supervisor Alan Thompson testified about the delay in verification. He explained how quickly Jenkins's identity could have been confirmed. Seconds. He explained how the delay served no legitimate purpose. He described his reaction upon seeing Jenkins detained. His frustration was evident, controlled but unmistakable. James Donovan took the stand late on the third day. From the first question, his demeanor worked against him. He spoke defensively. He justified his actions with vague references to training and instinct. When confronted with the video, he dismissed it as incomplete. When confronted with his complaint history, he grew agitated. His voice rose. Hale allowed it. She asked simple questions. Donovan volunteered damaging answers. The jury watched closely. Sergeant Klein testified the following morning. Unlike Donovan, he appeared subdued. When asked why he did not verify Jenkins' credentials, he hesitated. He spoke of judgment calls. Hale pressed gently. Verification would have taken seconds. He agreed. He admitted delaying it. He admitted relying solely on Donovan's account. His voice faltered when asked whether that choice was appropriate. He said nothing. Captain Harold Vance took the stand last. He spoke with polish. He framed his actions as administrative discretion. Hale presented internal emails, timelines, records of intervention. She asked whether protecting departmental image had influenced decisions. Vance denied it. Hale presented evidence to the contrary. The denial rang hollow. Closing arguments were brief and devastating. Hale reminded the jury that this case was about accountability, not anger, not politics. She walked them through the evidence one final time, choice by choice, failure by failure. She told them the law existed to protect everyone, especially when power was misused. She asked them to affirm that principle with their verdict. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the courtroom stood. The foreperson's voice was steady as the verdict was read. Liable on all counts, excessive force, false arrest, racial discrimination, deliberate indifference. The damages were read aloud. $7.5 million. A collective intake of breath followed. Sophia Jenkins closed her eyes briefly. Victoria Hale placed a hand on her shoulder. Outside. The sound of cheers rose as the verdict reached the crowd. Inside. The judge thanked the jury and recommended departmental reforms. The words carried weight. As Jenkins stepped out of the courthouse, flashes erupted. Voices called her name. She paused long enough to embrace Hale and Dr. Lisa Patel, who stood waiting. Her expression was calm, not triumphant, resolved. Justice had not erased what happened, but it had named it. And that, at last, changed everything. The consequences unfolded not with chaos, but with a steady, irreversible weight that pressed down on everyone involved. There were no dramatic arrests in the street, no raised voices, no final speeches. Accountability arrived the way it always does when the law finally works as intended, quietly, thoroughly, without escape. James Donovan was indicted weeks after the verdict, charged federally for civil rights violations and excessive use of force under color of law. The proceedings were swift. The evidence that had destroyed his credibility in civil court left little room for argument in criminal court. When the sentence was handed down, 5 years in federal prison. There was no outburst from him, no plea for mercy. He stood still, jaw clenched, as the judge read the order stripping him of his badge, his pension, and his authority. For the first time in his career, his certainty meant nothing. He was escorted away by marshals, not as an officer, but as an inmate. His family withdrew from public view soon after. The uniform that once protected him now symbolized the power he had abused and lost. Sergeant Robert Klein's fall was slower and more isolating. He was terminated from the Metropolitan Police Department within days of the verdict. His years of service reduced to a final personnel notice citing gross misconduct and failure of duty. Civil judgments followed quickly, draining savings intended for retirement. Legal fees mounted. Friends who once relied on his quiet influence stopped answering calls. His health declined under the strain. Sleepless nights became routine. The weight of knowing he could have ended everything with a single verification call followed him relentlessly. Silence, once his shield, became his sentence. Captain Harold Vance's collapse reshaped the department itself. The verdict unlocked federal investigations that had been stalled for years. Subpoenas were issued. Financial records were examined. Internal emails revealed patterns of obstruction and deliberate indifference. Testimony from within Metropolitan Police Department confirmed what many had suspected but never proved. Vance had not merely failed to act. He had acted to protect misconduct. Separate corruption charges were filed. His political allies vanished overnight. Fundraising collapsed. The press coverage turned unforgiving. The man who once controlled narratives could no longer contain them. Vance retreated from public life, issuing a brief statement denying wrongdoing and asking for privacy. Weeks later, news emerged quietly that he had taken his own life. The department released a short notice expressing condolences. There were no public memorials, no commendations. His end was tragic. But it did not absolve the damage caused by decades of unchecked authority. It stood as a stark reminder that power without accountability corrodes not only institutions, but the people who wield it. For Sophia Jenkins. The verdict did not feel like victory. It felt like confirmation. The truth had been named, the law had spoken, but the experience had changed her in ways no judgment could undo. She received the settlement funds without celebration or ceremony, after careful consideration, and long conversations with Victoria Hale and Dr. Lisa Patel. She made a deliberate choice. A substantial portion of the award was used to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and mentoring minority candidates pursuing careers in law enforcement and federal service. The foundation's mission was precise: legal support for those without resources, counseling for those carrying trauma, mentorship for those determined to serve without surrendering their integrity. Jenkins insisted on transparency from the start, accountability paired with reform, justice paired with opportunity. She did not want monuments. She wanted systems that worked. Jenkins returned to the FBI quietly. Without press conferences or interviews, the Bureau reaffirmed its support publicly and implemented revised interagency protocols nationwide. Joint training programs were expanded. Verification procedures were standardized. The incident that had humiliated her became a case study in what must never happen again. Within a year, Jenkins was promoted to a leadership role overseeing interagency cybercrime operations. Her authority now extended beyond her title. Younger agents sought her guidance. Supervisors listened when she spoke. She did not frame herself as a survivor. She framed herself as a professional who had insisted on the rule of law. When asked about the case in internal forums, she spoke plainly: document everything, follow protocol, question authority when it violates principle. Silence, she reminded them, is never neutral. Officer Maria Lopez's path forward was not immediate, but it was earned. Retaliation had come quietly, through reassignment and isolation. But it did not last. As reforms took hold and public scrutiny intensified, her actions were reevaluated. She received formal recognition for courage and integrity. The commendation came first behind closed doors, then publicly. She was promoted and transferred to a unit where ethical conduct was not treated as liability. Her career, once endangered by truth, was strengthened by it. When asked about her role, she offered no speeches. She said only that she had done what the badge required. Marcus Reed was appointed to lead a restructured internal affairs division. New oversight mechanisms were implemented. Complaint histories could no longer be quietly dismissed. Patterns were flagged automatically. External review boards were empowered. Transparency became policy rather than promise. Reed understood resistance would never disappear entirely. Systems, he knew, do not reform themselves. They reform when people inside them refuse to look away. Emily Carter's reporting earned national recognition. Her series was cited in journalism schools, policy hearings, and judicial training programs. Awards followed, but she accepted them without ceremony. She continued covering accountability cases with the same restraint and discipline that had defined her work from the beginning. The story of Sophia Jenkins became a reference point, not because it was sensational, but because it was documented. Years later, the parking lot near the J. Edgar Hoover building no longer felt anonymous. It had been renamed quietly, without fanfare. A small plaque stood near the entrance, simple and unadorned. It commemorated a commitment to lawful conduct and accountability. Nearby, in a museum exhibit on civil rights and modern justice, A pair of handcuffs rested behind glass. They were not presented as artifacts of shame, but as symbols of transformation. Visitors lingered there longer than expected. Sophia Jenkins stood before the exhibit one afternoon, alone. She looked at the cuffs without anger, without fear. They no longer held power over her. She thought of her father, of the morning that changed everything, of the silence that had once protected the wrong people. She understood now that justice was not loud by nature. It was deliberate. It was built through endurance, documentation, and refusal to accept erasure. She turned and walked away, her steps steady, her future clear. The system had tried to diminish her. Instead, it had exposed its own weakness. And through that exposure, something stronger had emerged. Accountability was no longer an abstract idea. It was a standard. And Sophia Jenkins had helped make it one. Thank you for watching and standing with the truth. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes accountability still matters.